The city of Charleston is still celebrating its 350th anniversary. I sit down one-on-one with City of Charleston Councilman Peter Shahid for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Peter Shahid, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Take five.
Take five with all of these equipment issues.
Yes.
And I got to get a new tripod.
You need to get a new tripod.
Yes, sir. Well, initially we were supposed to do a joint interview with you and Jonathan Green to discuss the commemoration of Charleston 350.
Correct.
And here I am with you singly right now, and to talk about that after all what's going on, coronavirus, whatnot. I know that the Charleston 350 commemoration obviously marks the arrival of the English settlers from Barbados to Charlestown Landing in 1670 and shares Charleston's full and accurate story up to the present day. Programs obviously were held earlier this year to honor the customs, diverse cultures, and rich heritage throughout a deep reflection and true representation of the city's history. What is that full, accurate story of Charleston right now?
What is the what story?
The full and accurate story.
Well, the full and accurate story is that we were taught in history books that these English settlers came to Charleston, established their settlement at what's now Charlestown Landing, moved and prospered, and the colony was a great colony. They made a lot of money and was very prosperous in culture and rich in heritage and culture. The first settlers who came to Charlestown in 1670 brought slaves with them. Somehow along the line of this history, that fact was left out. So Charleston, from the very beginning, from its inception, had this storied history of enslaving African Americans, of Africans. And we never were told that part of the story. We were never told the full contribution of Africans to the cultural aspect of our community. We were not told about their skill, how they help with carpentry or masonry or whatever else that they had special skills with, and they contributed to building Charleston. That's a part of history that we just sort of brushed over. Charleston City Council passed a couple of years ago the slave apology.
Right.
We did not understand, because it wasn't taught to us in the history books, about the city of Charleston's involvement in the promotion of slavery. We taxed human property like we would tax a car today. And that's part of how Charleston's history was not fully encompassed, fully embraced, and fully understood. Now that's history, but history makes us who we are today. Our past makes us who we are today. We need to understand what our involvement was and the contributions of a whole race of people had in our community.
What is Charleston today?
What is Charleston today? It's a good question. What is Charleston today? And we're having this conversation on June 10th. May 30th, we had a riot. Back in February, March, we were starting to shut down from a COVID-19 virus that we didn't know a whole lot about. And our response to all of that happened. 5 years ago, we had a mass murder at Mother Emanuel Church. We had a shooting of a white police officer in North Charleston against a black man who was running away from him. What is Charleston? And Charleston's reaction to those events talks about who we are as Charleston. On May 31st, Sunday morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was out there with all my colleagues from City Council in hats and gloves and brooms and dustpans and bags, and we were cleaning up. And next to me was a family who brought their young children out there to help clean up. A gentleman in a pickup truck hauling his power washing equipment to help clean up the sidewalks in the street. Right. Another gentleman with a pickup truck with plywood offering free to store owners how to board out their windows.
Right.
That's Charleston. So you ask the question, what is Charleston? Who is Charleston? That's all that is Charleston.
Charleston. And what are the customs, cultures, and rich heritage that Charleston 350 want to reflect on during this particular commemoration?
Well, let's think about the arts. Let's think about food. Let's think about poetry, literature. That's all ingrained in who we are. Religious affiliation. I never knew, and I grew up in Charleston, Quintin. I never heard of watch night. Never heard of watch night at all. I had no idea. And when the discussion came on New Year's Eve, what watch night was, and how it's still celebrated in several churches in our city,
right.
it was a moving and compelling story of enslaved people seeking freedom, seeking justice, seeking life, and the hope of that happening to them and how they celebrated that on New Year's Eve, followed by what traditionally took place on New Year's Day was a heartbreak day, because that's when the slave owners would then decide to have a trading day and sell their human property of enslaved people to other plantation owners. And families were broken up on New Year's Day. So you had this wonderful celebration of hope the night before, followed by heartbreak the day after. What a wonderful human story that molded us as a people, that had to mold us as a people. And it had to have a profound impact on who we are as Charlestonians. But we didn't celebrate that. And why did we not celebrate that? Why don't we commemorate that in a way to understand human experiences and how human experiences molded Charlestonians?
Let me pivot for just a second. You just talked about it just a second ago, and obviously I was down there the next day as well. But how does the city of Charleston seek justice after what happened a week ago on King Street?
And I think you have to ask the question, justice for who? Because you've come in from different angles. There are the folks who protested what obviously happened to George Floyd. And what happened to George Floyd was an injustice. So yes, there is a problem we have to address with police practices in our country, and how police arrest and address and treat people of a different color. We have to address that inequality. This certainly is an inequality of how that's happened. But it goes beyond just the arrest. In the criminal justice system, what we have not addressed is the investigation, the arrest, and then the other part of the process. The bond hearing. When a person is in front of a magistrate for a bond, what is the amount of the bond? What is the purpose of the bond? Is that person's bond set at such a reasonable rate so that the individual can go back to work? He or she is presumed innocent. And too many times, I've seen that regardless if they're presumed innocent or not, bond is used as a punishment. And we haven't talked about that. Then we haven't talked about the disparity on sentencing. And some of our laws that are on the books right now have mandatory minimum sentences, particularly for drug offenses. We need to be addressing that inequality of how those laws are applied to African Americans.
And you talk about those police practices. Which ones stick out in your mind right now when you think of the city of Charleston?
Well, we have the racial bias audit, and there were certain parameters that were issued by that audit as to what we need to do to be addressing police practices. I think we're addressing those head on. We're not backing off on addressing those. We haven't had the history what we've seen throughout the country in Charleston. We've got some things we need to address and we need to change and make sure that we're treating everybody fairly. And I think for the most part, we're doing that. But we are in tune, I think, with what that audit has required us to do and made suggestions to do that. So we're implementing those things. We've never had anything of this nature. What happened to George Floyd in Charleston City Police Department. But we've got some things that people are concerned about, and we need to be addressing those. I think we're doing that.
And let me get back to 350 of this, because
you're jumping all around on me, man.
That's all right.
That's all right.
I know Charleston, we all know Charleston is a great city, whose story is still unfolding and being examined by scholars, entrepreneurs, and everyday citizens. The Charleston 350 commemoration is an opportunity for the city and its people to get the stage and set the stage for the next chapters of Charleston's future as a great American city. What are those scholars and entrepreneurs saying, and what exactly are they examining now when it comes to the city?
Well, I think it goes back to one of the earlier questions of what we're talking about. The contributions is one thing that we need to be aware of, but also we need to be aware of other issues, and this sort of ties in, I think, with the overall theme of inequality. We haven't talked about affordable and attainable housing practices. We haven't talked about equal pay issues or school choice issues that are not applying to a large segment of our population. Those are other components of all this. I almost called you Jonathan. my partner Jonathan with all of this. He and I have had these discussions about this whole broad concept of telling the story, telling the full story, and then educating our youth about the story, and then taking that next step and making sure that we understand. It's from understanding how we can improve our lives in this community.
What is the story about affordable housing, attainable housing, economic, disparities and other issues such as education?
Well, here we are in Charleston, and I've grown up in Charleston all my life, and so Charleston was a very diverse on the peninsula.
Sure.
My grandfather came here, and there was not much of West Ashley, or James Island, or Johns Island. It was all on the peninsula. So different segments of the population lived together in a very small geographic area. The number of people of color who live on the peninsula has diminished. The property values have gone up to such an extent that has driven folks out. Coupled with that, when you live in a community, you've got to have basic services, educational services, grocery stores, hardware stores, just stores to be able to shop at without having to travel a great distance. And if you don't have adequate transportation, those things are out of your reach. So your quality of life is impacted by your inability to be able to travel to buy a half gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, or tonight's supper, or to be able to go to a store within reasonable distance to buy some hardware because you want to fix something that's in your house that needs some repair, or you need to go buy a pair of shoes or a dress or a suit. I mean, that has an impact. That draws out the cost of that item to the folks who don't have that accessibility, because transportation then comes into play and you have to pay for that transportation in order to get there. So your expense has now gone up. That's an inequity.
What is the quality of life in Charleston 350 years later here?
Well, from whose perspective? From my perspective, I have a wonderful quality of life. I live in a very nice area of town. I have access to water.
Sure.
It's a quiet neighborhood. I have an automobile that gets me back and forth. My commute time is very reasonable. I have access to a grocery store. I have access to restaurants within reach. My office is downtown at 89 Broad Street, right in the heart of the city, right next to courthouses and other restaurants and hotels. My quality of life is wonderful. I'm very blessed with my quality of life. Somebody else may have a different view on all of that, and I'm very conscious that somebody else has a different view of all of that. And so, ask that other person, what is their perspective on the quality of life in Charleston? I'm having good. I know I have it good. I'm very fortunate. I count my blessings every day. That's what I have. But I'm also very much aware that not everybody has the same opportunities that I do, or the same access to the opportunities that I do. And that's something that weighs heavily on my mind, because it's a fairness issue, so that people should not be cut out of that ability to enjoy life. We live in a great community. we live in a community in which the weather around here is very accommodating year round. It gets hot, obviously, but we have a pretty good access to water, which is pleasant. We can walk around parks and communities and things of that nature. Everyone pretty much seems to love one another around this community. And they seem to want to get along with one another in this community. And there's this very wonderful sense of let's pull in a direction. Now that direction may be different in everyone's eyes, but there is a community sense here that you don't find in a whole other lot of communities. We're a big town in a small city, or a small city in a big town. I mean, how you want to define that, I don't know. But we have the best of all of this that's available to us. The question is making sure that people have an opportunity. And I think that comes down to the bottom line. An opportunity for an education, an opportunity for housing, an opportunity to shop, an opportunity to advance. That's the key to America, to our idea of equity and fairness, is it?
Yeah. And how do you hope Charleston will advance in the next 350 years?
I hope that we take the Charleston 350 and the mission statement and the goals that we want to achieve, so that we have a building block, a foundation, so that generations from here see what we have done or tried to accomplish, and build on that, so that when we celebrate, let's not be too ambitious, let's say the next 50 years, so when we celebrate the 400th anniversary of Charleston, what did their forebearers do? How do they address all that? And how can they build on that foundation for 50 and 500 and 750 years from now? That's what we want to do.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and welcome back to Quintin's Focus.
Well, it's always glad to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome.